What does it mean to speak up when your voice isn't the one the system was really built to hear? How do people from marginalized groups communicate in spaces shaped by dominant norms? Those are the questions that drive Mark Orbe's co-cultural theory, a framework that reveals how power, culture, and identity shape everyday communication. And if you haven't guessed it yet, that is the focus of today's episode. Welcome back to Communication Campus. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart. And in today's episode, we are exploring co-cultural theory developed by Mike Orbe. This theory helps us understand how individuals from marginalized groups strategically communicate with dominant societal structures, often having to balance self-expression, safety, and survival. Now, co-cultural theory builds on the foundation of muted group theory and standpoint theory, both of which argue that social hierarchies shape who gets heard and how their communication is actually valued. Orbe extended these ideas into interpersonal and organizational contexts, asking, how do people from underrepresented groups adapt their communication to engage with dominant group members? The answer? Strategy. In our society, dominant groups hold structural power, socially, politically, institutionally. And co-cultural groups, on the other hand, are those that are going to experience marginalization based on race, gender, sexuality, disability, class, and a myriad of other identities. But co-cultural theory emphasizes that marginalized individuals are not passive. They actively make choices about how to communicate. And those choices depend on context, goals, and perceived risks. Now, Orbe defines 9 communication orientations based on 2 specific dimensions: the preferred outcome, assimilation, accommodation, or separation, and the communication approach, non-assertive, assertive, or aggressive. Now, if I'm trying to assimilate in a non-assertive way, I'm going to avoid differences and just do my best to fit in. If I want to be assertive, I might downplay my identity respectfully. And if I'm going to be aggressive, I'm going to mirror the dominant behaviors forcefully. Now, if I'm trying to generate some separation, well, I'm going to avoid dominant interaction at all. That's going to be my non-assertive. I'm just not going to engage in those conversations. My assertiveness is going to be building co-cultural spaces that allow for those types of conversations to be seen. And the aggressive way is to openly reject any form of dominant norms. Each orientation is a strategy. It's not a fixed identity, and people shift approaches based on context, power, and dynamics, and most of all, personal comfort. In other words, there's no one way that this is going to take place. And these strategies show up everywhere. A woman choosing to adapt her tone in a male-dominated setting, that's assimilation. An LGBTQIA employee advocating for inclusive policies, that's accommodation. And a group of students forming a cultural organization to celebrate identity, that would be separation. In each of these cases, communication is not just about the words. It's about navigating systems of power. Now, what does this all mean and why does this matter? Well, co-cultural theory gives us a lens to see how people exercise agency within constraints. It also challenges organizations educators, and leaders to recognize that inclusion isn't about asking people to fit in. It's about changing the norms that exclude them in the first place. And when we understand co-cultural theory, we become more mindful communicators, aware of the privilege, power, and courage it takes to speak up in spaces that weren't built for everyone. Okay, to sum it up, the communication we understand in this theory is shaped by social hierarchies and power. Co-cultural groups use strategic approaches to navigate dominant systems, and they understand that these dynamics help us to create more equitable and empathetic spaces. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode. I'm your host, Dr. Malynnda Stewart. In our next session, we will continue to look at this journey of culture and power. Until then, remember, every act of communication is also an act of courage. And therefore, please keep communicating.